worked for the Rebbe his whole life. He got on board first, Rabbi Groner became a secretary of the Rebbe before the Rebbe was Rebbe. He was a Chassidish Abacha. Rabbi Groner was a good boy. He sat and learned. He had a good head. And the Rebbe used to schlep him out of the Zal to work for him. So when the Rebbe first hired Rabbi Groner to work for him, they made a deal that they were not doing during the hours of Seder, only during the hours of break. That's what the Rebbe told him. So the first time the Rebbe called him out was during lunch, but the second time he already called him during Seder. So he said to the Rebbe, we made a deal, you're not going to take away from my learning. And the Rebbe said, what can I do? I need you. So he worked for the Rebbe. Anyway, and when the Rebbe became Rebbe, he was right there, Rabbi Groner. Label, Groner. And he kept a journal. He wrote every day what went on. They found a journal that he wrote of Yud Shvat Tov Shin Yud. You imagine? The day the Friedrich passed away, they found Rabbi Groner's journal from that day. It's so special. Because it's authentic, It was written then. It wasn't written later. But just Maisa, he wrote what happened that Shabbos. Anyway, Rabbi Groner's journal is very comprehensive, and they printed pieces of it in a book. It's called Hamaskir. There's going to be other books to follow. One of the sections that they have is about the story of Tov Lamed Ches in great detail. The story of Lamed Ches and the Rebbe's heart attack in extraordinary detail. I personally think there's a little too much information given in that book. But like I always say, it's not my responsibility. I'm very happy to have it and I've read it. It's very interesting. And I'm going to start this story in a very funny way, because it really is interesting. If you read the accounts that Rabbi Groner has, you have to understand, when the Rebbe got sick, he basically didn't go home. Label and Binyamin, they didn't go home. Till the Chedesh Kiss, they basically lived in 770. They lived in 770. And they were there 24 hours a day. Bechlal, I heard this from Dr. Rosen, who was not in Lamed Ches, he was a young guy. He was involved when the Rebbe had the stroke, Dr. Rosen told us once by Fabrengen that the derech that the Rebbe's secretaries had for the Rebbe was not normal. They were so close to the Rebbe. Rabbi Groner went to the Rebbe's room how many times every day? 5 times a day. That's 35 times a week. That's 140 times a month. That's close to... It's 1,500 times a year. He saw the Rebbe always. He talked to the Rebbe always. And the respect never diminished. He was in the Rebbe's room, and he was a doctor, so he was sitting. And the secretary, he told us a story that the secretary wouldn't sit. Apparently one of the secretaries hadn't slept since the stroke, and he pushed it, fell down, boom. He was standing, and midnight he gefallen, because he hadn't slept like in 3 days. He was mishtoimim. He was very, very, the respect that the Rebbe's maskirim had for the Rebbe. The Rebbe's the only person that the closer you get to him, the more you respect him. Most people, the closer you get to them, the more you can't stand them, because everybody has chesreinis. But the Rebbe, the closer you were to the Rebbe, the more you always mensch from the Rebbe, the Lakus, in every aspect. So they didn't leave 770. When the Rebbe had his heart attack, they pushed didn't leave. And Rabbi Groner's journal reveals the following. First of all, you all know that the Rebbe didn't want to go to the hospital. I'm sure you know that part of it. The Rebbe didn't want to go to the hospital. And the Rebbe then going to the hospital put him in great peril. The doctors, we don't know exactly how many, but apparently a few, maybe 3 or 4 big doctors, or the biggest doctors. I mean, New York, believe it or not, is a very important place. I mean, some of the most important doctors in the world live in New York City and practice in New York City. New York is not, it's a very important place, New York. It used to be more important, but it's still plenty important. And some of the most important doctors in the world came to examine the Rebbe, and they looked at the Rebbe and they said they have to go to the hospital. And when the Rebbe refused, they would get really upset. Okay, put it on the side. Yeah, instead of it being a bother the whole shir, it would bother one only once. They got really upset. One of them actually started screaming, and they left. And the Rebbe did not have a doctor. He had no cardiologist. Now, there were doctors who were Lubavitchers, who were by Akofis, who knew medicine, but their expertise was not heart. And there was a big sakona for the Rebbe. So there's the famous story where the Rebbe Chaim said to Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, Rabbi Krinsky, you know so many people, you can't find anybody who could heal the Rebbe, my husband, my man, the way he wants. And at that moment, he remembered Dr. Weiss from Chicago. And he called him, and Dr. Weiss came. But Dr. Weiss, when he tells the story, he points out that he said to Rabbi Krinsky that he's going to take him a few hours to get there. He has to fly. He has to go to the airport. He has to get money. And he has to fly. He says, I'll call my professor, his teacher. His teacher was Dr. Tischholz, who was a Yid, but I don't think he was from. And Dr. Tischels came right away. He was a very important man. He came right away, and he stayed with the Rebbe till Dr. Weiss came. And he said that he saved the Rebbe's life. He stayed, by the time Dr. Weiss came, the Rebbe's situation was more normal, because the Rebbe was extremely ill during the night. The Rebbe had a massive heart attack, a second one. It was a matzah of sakona gedei Rabbi Yossi. But when you talk about Dr. Weiss, I need to tell you something, people. Have you ever watched him speak? Ever heard Dr. Weiss speak? Yes. If you go now to the Torah Cafe, which is JLI, you know what Torah Cafe is? Just type in Dr. Ira Weiss. There's many talks of his that he spoke by the, what they call the retreat, the JLI retreat. And he said things that are wow. He starts off his speeches by saying that I'm a doctor, and the doctor has to protect the privacy of his patients, but I'm allowed to speak about the Rebbe's medical care. So I was given a special rider by the Rebbe, permission by the Rebbe to do so, because during the Pashas HaSfarim, the Rebbe they wanted the Rebbe to come and testify. And he was asked, as a professional witness, as a doctor, to testify that it's a sakona for the Rebbe to come and testify. So the Rebbe allowed his medical records to be made public. So B'meila, he's allowed to share. And he shares a lot. Again, probably more than he should. But Dr. Weiss gave up his life for the Rebbe. Dr. Weiss gave up his life for the Rebbe. That man had a practice. He had a good practice. He was a doctor. They threw him out of the practice because of his care for the Rebbe. And he never got another one. I want you to think about this. Dr. Weiss is an American-born Jew, from but very modern, not a chassid. He, as a cheder, he learned by Rabbi Shusterman, which is how he came to Lubavitch in the first place. Rabbi Shusterman in Chicago happens to be Rabbi Krinsky's brother-in-law. Rabbi Shusterman's wife is a Krinsky, and that's how the connection happened. Dr. Weiss wrote a little book, and he gave it as a gift to Rabbi Shusterman. Rabbi Shusterman said to the Rebbe, that book was sitting in the Rebbe's room, and Dr. Weiss walked into the Rebbe and said, look, I have your book in my room, because they were sent to the Rebbe. Dr. Weiss lost his practice, never regained his practice. You know, we talk about Mesidus Nefesh, Mesidus Nefesh. Dr. Weiss gave away his life and his wife's life and his children's life for the Rebbe's health. Mekendish Mishayir Zayin. We have no measure. To use Litvish Oisius, his place in Gan Eden. I once heard him speak face to face, and he makes it into nothing. He says, after I healed the Rebbe, I was able to practice medicine my way. You know what practicing medicine his way meant? That a patient couldn't afford it, didn't charge. He belonged to a practice. The practice, there's billing and there's all kinds of stuff, yeah? They threw him out of the practice. He never got into a new practice. He worked for himself at Veinik Fadim. Dr. Weiss probably made 1/10 of what a cardiologist could make, parnasa-wise, to heal the Lubavitch Rebbe. It's mamish, you have to put this person on a pedestal, not just of respect and Pashat Hiskashrus, what it means a person is Moisa Nefesh for the Rebbe, and it's not just him, it's his wife and it's his kids. There's no way to say enough about the greatness of the sacrifice that this man made. And he makes it into like no big deal. He really doesn't, you talk to him, the Rebbe needed to be healed. So he came to Crown Heights, he didn't leave for weeks. And the guy said, listen, you can go for a day or two, but you can't go for 3 weeks. You have a practice, you have a job. They fired him. They fired him. Anyway, the Rebbe was in 770. Now, the doctors would say later that if they had known that they could bring the hospital to 770, they would have never have said to move him. What ended up happening was they brought the cardiac unit to 770. They got the best machines in the world for a heart. The best machines in the world, the most updated machines that measure heart and all these kinds of things. They brought the hospital to 770. And the doctors who Lechatchila were saying if the Rebbe doesn't go to the hospital, his life is in danger, would say that if they knew that they could bring the hospital to the Rebbe, they would have Lechatchila said that's the best way to heal the Rebbe. Anyway, the bottom, what I want to share with you from Rabbi Groner's journal, which is sort of new, and I probably spoke about it last year because the book was published more than a year ago, is that the Rebbe was very opposite of not going to the hospital. He really was, very stubborn. He also wanted to go back to work as soon as possible. The Rebbe spoke already about the Simchas Torah, and he started answering mail. But if you look at Rabbi Groner's journal, you see clearly that the Rebbe was a very good patient. He listened to the doctors. When I was a kid growing up, we always heard the story that the night of Simchas Torah, the Rebbe slept for 4 hours. 4 hours, the night of the heart attack, the night of Shmini Atzeres. 4 hours he slept. And in the middle of his sleep, he had the second heart attack. And the Rebbetzin said that I married to him for 50 years, and I never saw him sleep so much. 4 hours. For some people, it's a Shabbos afternoon nap. 4 hours. And I never saw him sleep so much in my entire marriage. But wait, that's not the end of the story. In Rabbi Groner's book, it says that after Simchas Torah, there were nights that the Rebbe slept so many hours that the Rebbetzin would come into 7:70 and say, "Vifel the shir schlafen." The Rebbetzin, how much are you going to sleep? The Rebbe would sleep 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours. There was a small window of time when the Rebbe was a very good patient. He listened to the doctors. There were a whole bunch of things that he had to do. First of all, they changed his diet, and they took salt out of the diet. And at one point, the Rebbe said, "I need some salt," because the Rebbe used to eat a lot of salt. And salt is not good for a person with a weak heart, because it has sodium. So the Rebbe, they let the Rebbe have a little bit of salt. Yeah? The Rebbe used to exercise. The Rebbe used to walk in the hallway. 770 upstairs was closed off. It was not available to the public. And the Rebbe used to walk in the hall with Dr. Resnick. Walk, take exercise, little steps, walk. Walk in the hallway at 770. He ate on a schedule. He would eat this hour and eat this hour. And all of this is recorded in this journal, which is now published. And the Rebbe slept enormous amounts. He slept a sack schlafen. But this lasted till like the middle of Kislev, for about 6 weeks. He was a very good patient, like a folk. Till the Chedesh Kislev, he lived in 770. After the Chedesh Kislev, he went home. Now, of course, one of the stories that goes with the Chedesh Kislev Parsha is they're not going to the oil. You must remember, the Rebbe's whole mitzvah is the oil. You know, one of the Alter Chassidim once said to the Rebbe, "Why does the Rebbe go to oil? Why does the Rebbe go to the oil so much?" You can finish. It's going to take longer this way. So the Rebbe said, "You want answers? You want answers? If you want answers, I need oil." Oil was everything for the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, "Bechlal," the Rebbe's relationship with the Rebbe, which is also a parsha. Talk about Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe used to say about the Rebbe the following: "Mein man kann in kein Sach nicht heißen. Ich kann nur Matthias. Ich kann nur vorschlagen. You can't tell my husband to do anything. You can only make a suggestion. You get one shot. You make a suggestion. If you say it in the wrong time and he says no, you can't say it again." So she was his wife, for heaven's sake. She was logistical about how she would encourage the Rebbe to take care of himself. And she was very careful. She was very respectful. The Rebbe's respect for the Rebbe. She looked after the Rebbe. She took care of the Rebbe. But she was very careful not to push the Rebbe. So when the Rebbe got sick, she really left the Rebbe alone. She didn't fight with the Rebbe going to the hospital. You know, that's the story. You know, all the Chassidim was saying they should put the Rebbe to sleep and take him in the sleep, and the Rebbe said, "No, you can't do something which my husband said explicitly. Literally, not allowed to go against his will." But one of the things that she did say to the Rebbe was that maybe the Rebbe shouldn't go to the oil. And the Rebbe agreed. So Erev Chedesh Chesed, the Rebbe didn't go to the oil. And I think Erev Chedesh Kislev also the Rebbe didn't go to the oil. Mistama by Tezvav Kislev, or for sure Chanukah, the Rebbe already went to the oil. Mistama, it was short, but the Rebbe already went to the oil. But a couple of months the Rebbe missed oil. And the doctor said to the Rebbe on that day, "Rebbe, how do you feel?" He says, "Physically I feel fine, but spiritually I'm very disappointed because I'm not able to go to the oil." He listened to the Rebbe about not going to the oil.
When was this that the doctor asked him?
The same day, Shabbos, Erev Rish Chedesh Chesed Tafshlam Ches. The day the Rebbe asked the Rebbe not to go to the oil, he agreed not to go. The doctor asked the Rebbe. So you read this journal and you see how good a patient. And the Rebbe used to calculate milchiks and fleishiks because he had to eat every 6 hours. It's amazing. He would eat 6 o'clock at night and then 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening, 12 o'clock at night. So he would have to be worried about milchiks and fleishiks. So the details that are published are very interesting. And again, I don't know if we need to hear all this information. But for a while, it was really, really cooperative. He slept and he ate and he exercised and the doctors told him. But then one day the Rebbe said, "We're finished." Now, Dr. Weiss said in his talks, you can go to JLI and just search Dr. Ira Weiss. He has 45-minute talks, several of them, where he tells many details of the story of the Rebbe's health. And also, Bechlal, he spoke to the Rebbetzin on the phone every single day for 10 years. Every single day. About the Rebbe's health and about the Rebbetzins' health. until the Rebbetzin passed away, he was extremely involved, and they became very close. The Rebbetzin and Dr. Weiss became very close. The Rebbetzin liked him. He was a likable man. He was a very sweet man. He is a very sweet man. The Rebbetzin had Pashat lieb gehabt. He says in one of his interviews that somebody said to him, Rabbi Dr. Weiss, you're the Rebbetzins first child. So somebody said, no, the Rebbetzins first child is Rabbi Krinsky, and you're the second one. The Rebbetzin liked Rabbi Krinsky. There's no question about it. It was a special relationship. But in any case, at one point the Rebbe said, enough. What's that point? Sometimes in Kislev, someplace in the middle of Kislev, maybe towards Hanukkah time, where the doctors asked the Rebbe about how he's doing and what his progress is, and the Rebbe said, I want to go back like before. I want to make believe it didn't happen. Now Dr. Weiss, I started to say this, Dr. Weiss says in one of his talks that on a scale of 1 to 10, the Rebbe had a 10. The Rebbe had the worst heart attack a person could have. And B'klal, people who have such heart attacks, either they don't make it B'klal, and if they do, they're a rag, they have no koyach. The heart muscles do not heal. They form scar tissue. The heart is a pump. And the heart is damaged, it's a part of the pump that doesn't work. If you have, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of the Rebbe's heart stopped working? How much? And if more of the heart stops to work, there's less heart to pump more blood. So the heart has to work harder. So the heart gets sicker. People have a heart attack like that. The Rebbe's recovery is so shalai al pi teva. And by the way, in one of his talks, he describes how the doctors told him he was not allowed to eat salt. So the Rebbe explained to the doctors scientifically why. Because if you eat salt, it expands the muscles. And if you don't eat salt, the muscles contract. If the muscles contract, the holes are smaller. The hump flows with greater force. And Dr. Weiss said to the Rebbe, yeah, that's exactly why. The Rebbe had verstanden the medicine from the mechanical side, you understand? And he explained it to the doctor, and the doctor said, yeah, that's exactly right. But one day the Rebbe just said, enough, I'm not patient anymore. And that was the end of it. It did happen relatively slowly, but you see in the journal the shift. For a Meshazman, I would say 6 weeks, the Rebbe Pasha, the way I like to read it, the Rebbe healed himself. The Rebbe listened to the doctors, but it was Mahadir. The Rebbe should sleep 8 hours a night. The Rebbe never slept. The Rebbe Pasha healed himself. But the Rebbe decided after this many weeks, and I'm sure he knew what he was doing, that he's healed. And once he's healed, he got to go back to work. And that was it. And then he didn't listen anymore. That was it. The game was up. He just did what he wanted. And there's some wonderful stories about how that transition happened. And again, you could read all of this in the journal, which is now published in the book Hamas. I think it's translated into English also. A number of things happened. One of them was that the Rebbe gave Chanukah geld. The Rebbe stood by there's videos. The Rebbe stood by the back door of 770 and handed out dollars, which was not so common. I mean, you know about the Rebbe giving dollars. But when I was a kid growing up, the Rebbe didn't give dollars like that. The Rebbe used to give the children dimes. He would give dollars by Fabrengens through Tankisten. The Rebbe didn't give everybody $1 himself. He would give dollars to the Tankisten and they would give us dollars. On that occasion, Chanukah Tashel Lamed Ches, the Rebbe stood by the back door of 770 and everybody walked by, and the Rebbe personally handed you the dollar, which later on would become a common practice. When that happened, the Maskirim went nuts. Everybody went nuts. The Maskirim went crazy. The secretaries went crazy. The Vada Meshad, everyone worried about the Rebbe's health. David Raskin, all Machon, told us on the Fabrengen once, I was there, that the Rebbe is standing by the back door of 770 handing out dollars, and he's standing next to the Rebbe telling people, don't go. The Rebbe can't stand it. It's for the Rebbe's health not good. So the Rebbe turns to him, to David Raskin, who was a big chassid. And he says to him, "Van weißt du, what's the best for my gesund? How do you know what's best for my health? Maybe for my health I must give these dollars." And the Rebbe said to the secretaries, today there's no refuah. Today there's no secretaries. He told Chadakov, take your $1, go home. Don't stick around. I don't need you. I'll manage myself. He told Rabbi Grodin, take your $1 and leave. And the Rebbe gave everybody $1. It was a moment. It was one of those examples of where the Rebbe made it very clear that he's not sick anymore. Finished. And another example, one of the most famous examples, was the story with the Achei Temimim. You've heard the story before, and in years past, actually, I do the same things every year. And at some point, you run out of new material, The Zohar that I'm about to tell you about, I actually brought the Zohar into class, the Beis Rivka class, And I read it with the girls, I learned it with you, and I posted it online. If you want to go to my website, InsideChassidus.org, you can find my Achei Temimim page, or my Rebbe page, and I taught the Zohar that the Rebbe does. The story behind it is as follows. Yankel Hecht, Oliver Shalom, J.J. Hecht, once got up in 770 and he told a story. And I've said this before, are there any Hechts in the room? I think this is very good for people to know. They used to have big Fabrengen 770 4 or 5 times a year. 4 or 5 times a year, big Fabrengens. Let's say Yud Kislev, Yud Shvat, Chveis Vas, Yud Aleph Nissen, the Beis Tammuz, and then it has Vavelo, the Chassidim would Fabrengen. And they would set up a dais, they put that food, and people would come in the speeches. And it were pretty much the same speakers every time, except for the guests who came from out of town. Most people that got up to speak came, and they did not prepare 1 minute. So a lot of them, every time they spoke, they had the same speech. J.J. Hecht was always prepared. When he came to 770 to speak, he had enough respect for himself, and enough respect for the Olam. He always came prepared. And his speeches are classic. If you could collect those speeches that Rabbi Hecht said in Shul 770, every speech is so unique because he prepared himself. He would prepare. He'd go through his archives. Rabbi Hecht was so very close to the Rebbe. He'd find something unique and special, and he would share it. And that was his participation in the Fabrengen. And then Yizrach Hashmer Latev. It's a lot. He didn't say, okay, who cares about the Lubavitchers? He came to 770 prepared. So in one of his speeches, he tells a story that you're all excited about the Shchedesh Kislev. He says, I'm not excited because I'm used to this kind of stuff, the miracles with the Rebbe. And he tells the following story. That on the Zeis Chanukah, he gets a call from the Rebbe. They want to see him. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm almost certain Rabbi Hecht had an open door by the Rebbe. He went to do whatever he wanted. Yankel Hecht, J.J. Hecht, he had an open door. But this time the Rebbe summoned him. About 11 o'clock in the morning, he walked into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said to him with a smile, I'm looking for somebody who knows how to get things done, who knows how to keep a secret. Now, Rabbi Hecht was about meretz. He got things done, but I don't know about keeping secret. That wasn't his strength. That's why the Rebbe laughed. And the Rebbe said, the Shver Gezok, the Friedrich Rebbe said, there's 3 levels of people who know how to keep a secret. One of them, he has a secret, and if you'll bother him, he'll give it away. Another one, he has a secret. He'll never give it away, but you see that he's holding a secret. The third one has a secret, and you don't even know that he has a secret. You don't even know he's carrying a secret. And the Rebbe says, I want to make a Fabrengen, and I want to wash, and I want to bench, and I want to give Kesha Bracha, because I want to make up for the fact that Simchas Torah, because of the situation, I was not able to do it. So I want you to get Chale for everybody. And Mashke, bottles of Mashke, the Rebbe give bottles of Mashke, and wine for Kesha Bracha, and I don't want anybody to know, because I don't want the secretaries and the doctors to sabotage this effort. He walks out of the Rebbe's room and he meets Label Gronu. Yankel, what does the Rebbe want? He says, nah, personal business. He says, yeah, Label Gronu never forgave me for that. Label never forgave me. Personal business. He went to the bakery and he said, I need hundreds of bilkalach and he baked and he ate. Then he went to a liquor store. This is an interesting story in itself. He had a balabas who had a liquor store whose wife had Yena Machla Nevach. This is 45 years ago, almost 50 years ago. In other words, the medicine has advanced. I don't know if you guys know that mamish every year, when it comes to all illnesses, including cancer, there's new ways of healing people. The percentage of people who recover today from illnesses, b'chlal, from Yena Machla, is so much higher. It's so much more likely, especially if you catch it early. If a person is chas v'shalom ill, there used to be mamish a death sentence. It's not true anymore. There's a long way to go till a cure. But the medicine every year gets better since 45 years ago. And Rabbi Hecht came to this. He was a balabas of his. He said, I need bottles of vodka, pints of vodka for the Rebbe to give out. So he tells Rabbi Hecht that my wife's life is very important to me. But the Rebbe's life is important to everybody. So that the Rebbe has a refuah shleima is more important than my wife. Because the Rebbe is a ish tziburi, is a general person, and my wife is a personal person. And he gave him the mashke. I think he gave it for free. The Rebbe insisted later on in paying it. Anyway, he filled up his car with all the supplies, and he parked in front of 7-7. He asked the Rebbe, could he tell the Bachrim? He said, tell the Bachrim? It's like announcing it to Australia. So he said to the Rebbe, can I tell the secretaries? And the Rebbe says, the whole reason I'm telling you is I don't want the secretaries to know. So he says to the Rebbe, can I tell my brothers? Now you have to understand, there were 6 Hecht brothers, 6. And their closeness to they were Galatiana, they were not Russian Chassidim from America, they came there. The relationship they had with the Rebbe was, and the Friedrich Rebbe was very, the Friedrich Rebbe called them Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. It was a very special personal connection. Very special, mamish. You can see it in the dollars. When they walk by, every time the Rebbe sees them, the Rebbe's face lights up. Very special, all 6 of them. So he asks the Rebbe, can I tell my brothers? He said, yeah, you can tell your brothers. So anyway, he called up his brother Avram Hecht, who lived in Brooklyn, Flatbush. And he says to him, I have a secret that I'm not allowed to tell anybody, but I'm allowed to tell you that the Rebbe making Fabrengen today, this hour, I think right after Mincha, and you should see to come. So he came. Maybe another brother came also, but Avram Hecht was there. Anyway, last minute, Rabbi Hecht said, Yankel Hecht said, I didn't tell anybody else, except Berel Yunik, Rabbi Yunik, who worked in the city, Manhattan. He used to set up the Rebbe's place and hold the Rebbe's becher. He says, I called him. I said, listen, the Rebbe's making a Fabrengen. No one's allowed to know, but you should come and prepare that the Rebbe should have what he needs for the Fabrengen. Otherwise, nobody knew. It was a very last minute. Mamish, less than a minute. After Mincha, they announced the Fabrengen, Mincha, Fabrengen. I was in Tavshel Lamachas, I was 12. I was in Ocean Parkway. When the Rebbe started that Fabrengen, they put us on buses and sent us to Crown Heights. By the time we got to Crown Heights, the Rebbe was already, his Fabrengen was over. The Rebbe was giving Kesha Bracha. Anyway, it was a surprise Fabrengen. Fabrengen was not very long, an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe. And then the Rebbe said a Maimer, which is now edited. There was Magia that Maimer, and then Rebbe gave Kesha Bracha. After the Fabrengen, Avram Hecht was a Talmud Chacham, a big Talmud Chacham, says to his brother Yankel Hecht, J.J. Hecht, I want you to know that what we just experienced is a Suda Seder. This was the Rebbe's thanking the Eibishter for his recovery. I heard once from one of Rabbi Groner's nephews that months after Shabbos, after Simchas Shmini Atzeres, the Rebbe said to Label Groner, you know, that all night long, when I was sleeping, every 15 minutes you were opening the door. The Rebbe tells the label. Every 15 minutes you open the door. Why were you opening the door? Now, the reason he was opening the door is because the doctors thought the worst. The Rebbe's not going to make it through the night. So Rabbi Gorer didn't answer. So the Rebbe said, I know why you opened the door, huh? Look at me now. Look at me now. How am I doing? Look at me now. The recovery was shalei apitava legamre. So Avram Hecht says, the Yankel Hecht, this was a Tzudis Seder. So the two of them sat down and they wrote a very emotional letter to the Rebbe, full of brachas for the Rebbe and expressing their gratitude, number one, that they have a relationship with the Rebbe, and number two, that they had an opportunity to participate in this Seder. So they sent this into the Rebbe, and they get back from the Rebbe, Ye'uyon Hakdomas Hazayah. Take a look in the introduction of there. Now, I don't know whether the Rebbe wrote a page number or not. When Yankel Hecht told the story, he didn't say a page number. Look at the introduction to the Zohar. The reason is, the introduction to the Zohar is many, many pages. The bottom line is, I think it's Achei Temimim. There's a story in the Zohar. And Yankel Hecht read the Zohar for the whole crowd in 770. Like I said, I've learned that Zohar many times. I've taught that Zohar many times because it's truly remarkable. It's really remarkable. What does it say in that Zohar? It says in that Zohar that Reb Chia passed away. It's a long story. Reb Chia passed away. But the Chia was walking and he was very upset and he was saying, how could the earth have swallowed up Reb Shimon? The way the story goes was, Reb Chia cursed the ground that had swallowed up Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And then at one point he stops and says, no, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is alive. Just like us, he's alive. This earth didn't swallow him. And it changed his whole mood. The end of the story was, he himself went up Lamaila. And he went to places where Neshamas are not allowed to go, Tanya and Tanya Perek Yud, it says, Man min chein, di chasheichel lemahapchel leneheder, ubetam umenidol lemiskin ad leyesen hoch. Any of you who have not transformed darkness to light, or burden to should not come here. That quote in the Zohar is in this story. Like, who's he doing? What's he doing here? Reb Chia ended up in the highest madrega. It describes the whole elevator, how he went from level to level. Very interesting stuff. Very mystical, very, mythological kind of. And he ended up in the cheder with the Shimon Bar Yochai, and he had company. Eliyahu Navi was there, Mashiach was there, Achei Temimim, all the chaver were there. And Reb Shimon is saying Torah, and all of a sudden Mashiach says, who's this guy? Reb Chia, what's he doing here? He's a physical person, a physical. How do you get into this Gan Eden? And Reb Shimon says to him, no, he can be here. He's okay, he's Beseder. He's allowed to be here. And he explains that he's purified himself enough that he deserves to be in Gan Eden Elyon. And then Reb Shimon Achei says to Mashiach, he needs more time. So they gave him time, and he left, and he came back down Lamata. That's the story. So the Rebbe himself said, when he wrote to the Rebbe that it's Suda Seidoya, the Rebbe said, look at the Zayah, and you'll understand what happened. And the way Yagelech explains the story, the way he tells everything, that the Pshat and the Maisa is that the Rebbe is saying that this was his time, and he said, I need more. So they gave him more, and he came back down. This is a story that the Rebbe himself revealed about his own recovery from the heart attack. It's mamish unbelievable. So this is a little bit of the story of Achei Temimim. I sort of started with a Fabrengen. There's a story to tell, right? But the Fabrengen is that the Rebbe healed him. The Rebbe did heal himself. He was a pretty good patient. One of the things that happened is that Pesach time that year, the Rebbe called in the entire medical team. All the people who helped him medically. And the Rebbe said to them, he's the kind of man who likes to be self-sufficient. He doesn't like to rely on anybody else. He likes to take care of himself all by himself, he says. But I had a situation where I was not able to care for myself. I needed others to care for me. And you were those people. In other words, you were able to do something for me, which Kayachol I was unable to do for myself. And the Rebbe gave them a very special thank you. But for a while, the Rebbe was a good patient, and then one day the Rebbe says, okay, I'm not sick anymore, back to work. And it did happen to some extent slowly, but the Rebbe's recovery was extraordinary. It was really, really very special. I'll give you a few basic historic outline. I don't know dates. I was all of 12 when this happened. I was a little boy, and I was a very stupid 12-year-old. Some 12-year-olds were paying better attention than I was. My 11-year-old younger brother probably remembers better than I. That winter, the Rebbe didn't come downstairs. The Rebbe stayed upstairs. So for the beginning, the Rebbe davened Pashat in his room, and at some point, they made a minyan in the shul upstairs. But 770 upstairs was completely closed off until the Rebbe went home, which was Achei Temimim. The Rebbe used to go into the shul for Kriyas HaTorah and for Mincha Ma'adir and for Shabbos. But they had rules who could daven with the Rebbe. So there were oises of Aleph base. In other words, every Shabbos, if your last name was Paltiel, so there was a Shabbos for all the pays, you got to go into the Rebbe's room, in the Rebbe's shul. Otherwise, they didn't let you in. It was private. They didn't let people in. But the Rebbe would go to shul for it's about till Pesach time. The Rebbe davened upstairs in shul. What about Fabrengens? So the Rebbe used to speak from his room. What's a Shabbos? He would speak from his room. He'd sit by his table and he would speak a sicha, and we would listen downstairs. The first time the Rebbe did that was Matzah Simchas Torah, 2 days after the heart attack, around midnight. The Rebbe sat at his table and spoke, and the Rebbe's voice is you can hear how sick he is. And the Rebbe is very emotional. The Rebbe cries. The Rebbe asked the doctors to speak, and the doctors said it's really not a good idea for you to speak so close after the heart attack. And the Rebbe said he wants to. The doctor said, how long? And the Rebbe said, I can speak and speak. I never run out of things to say. So the doctor said, okay, you can speak for 7 minutes. And the Rebbe listened to the doctor. He spoke only for 20. The Rebbe said, okay. This became a seder. Every month of Shabbos, we'd come to 7. I remember this. We were kids, and we'd stand downstairs and we'd speak. Now, I didn't understand one word the Rebbe was saying. So the first few weeks, it was okay. It was 20 minutes, half an hour. But by Vayera Chayesada, it was 2 hours. They would just talk, a whole Fabrengen, There were no Nigunim, there was no L'chaim, there was no breaks, just talked and talked and talked and talked. Very long, 2.5 hours. They would sit in his room and talk. The first time I saw the Rebbe was at this Kislev. I wasn't there at Achei Temimim. The Rebbe came down to Fabrengen. I was a 12-year-old. And I remember looking at the Rebbe to try to see if the Rebbe looks any different. And it looked exactly the same to me. But the fact was that he wasn't the same. He was quite ill. Dr. Weiss and Dr. Resnick were sitting in the benches. Right? If you could imagine facing the Rebbe, they were closer to the Kingston, to Mizrach than to Ma'ariv. They're sitting on a bench very close to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe had a cardiogram, had a monitor on him, which was wireless. In those days, wireless was a big deal. Today, who has wires, And they had the cardiogram on their lap. And they were sitting near each other, and they were monitoring the Rebbe's heart. And I remember this, in the middle of the Fabrengen, the Rebbe turned to them to say L'chai, maybe with his hand. But when he put his left hand on his pulse, as a sign. He made it say L'chai, but he put his I'm recognizing what you're doing for me. Dr. Weiss says they watched the Rebbe's heart. The Rebbe's heart was very irregular. They were very worried. He says they had veto power. And they were young doctors. Dr. Resnick was still a medical student. And Dr. Weiss, if Dr. Weiss is now 80, he was then in his 20s. No, he was then in his early 30s. But he was probably still, he was a very young doctor. And they could tell the Rebbe to stop the Fabrengen in the middle. The Rebbe would listen. But he says if they had stopped the Rebbe in the middle, the Rebbe would never do the Fabrengen again. They took the Achreis, they let the Rebbe finish, and they're watching the Rebbe's heart, and it was bad. It wasn't good. But there's a story that's told, and it's hard to know where the story comes from, but apparently it's true, that once the Rebbe said a maimer, I think Dr. Weiss says it, and the heart became normal. When the Rebbe said a maimer, the heart was healthy. But otherwise, they let the Rebbe finish, he says. And the way he words it in the medical languages, we allowed the Rebbe to continue his career as a Rebbe by letting the Rebbe finish. And they were young guys, they took the Achrayas, they're watching the Rebbe's heart, and they see that this Nishkut, the Rebbe's heart is not doing well, and they let him finish Fabrengen. Then that was it. As the only time I saw there that whole winter. I had several cousins who got married that winter, so they got aliyahs in the Rebbe's shul upstairs. So my father went to the minyan, but he didn't let us come, only adults. The next time I saw the Rebbe was Pesach. Motzah Pesach, the Rebbe Fabrenged downstairs, also without a mic. That was a big chiddush without a mic. You know what? No, I'm wrong. Yud Shvat probably was a Fabrengen, and Purim, the Rebbe came down during that winter, during the week. But Shabbos was no Fabrengens. The Rebbe didn't Fabrengen Shabbos for several years, for 2 whole years. I'm wrong. Yud Shvat, the Rebbe was a Fabrengen, Purim was a Fabrengen. Asana B'Tevis, the Rebbe came downstairs with the elevator and spoke on a mic. But Shabbos and Yom Tov, there was no Fabrengens that winter. I'm assuming after Pesach, but I'm not sure exactly when, they began a seder of the Fabrengens of Shabbos being Matzah Shabbos. You understand? So in the winter time it was called for 9:30, in the summertime it was called for 10:30, and there was the Fabrengen which normally the Rebbe would hold on Shabbos, he held after Shabbos. And it was, if you want to hear how a Shabbos Fabrengen sound, and Shabbos Fabrengens are very different than weekend Fabrengens, because they're much more intimate, they're much more hamish. So for 2 years, all of Lamed Ches, and all of Lamed Tes into Tov Shin Mem, we're supposed to stop at what time? 35, yeah? Yeah, 35, yeah? The Rebbe Fabrengen Motzei Shabbos. There's tapes, it's very interesting to listen to those Fabrengens. Pesach was the first time the Rebbe Fabrengen without a mic, and slowly things returned to normal. My brother has a very big schus. My brother's Zogazunzan. His birthday was Chof Cheshvan, which was Shabbos in Tov Shin Mem. So the Rebbe didn't Fabrengen Shabbos. So all my non-Lubavitcher uncles and aunts came to Crown Heights, so they made a big kiddush Fabrengen for the Brit Mitzvah. That was the first time the Rebbe Fabrengen on a Shabbos afternoon. My brother was a Bar Mitzvah boy, and he felt so bad that Rebbe was ruining his Bar Mitzvah, because all of his Misnagdish relatives came. They didn't come to Fabrengen, they stayed home. The Sudas Bar Mitzvah was after Shabbos. So at the time, he was like, really? The Rebbe has to Fabrengen now? 2 years in the Fabrengen. But he thought about it later. He says, the Rebbe Fabrengen for me. The first time the Rebbe made a Fabrengen on Shabbos after Lamed Ches was Chof Cheshvan. 2 years later, Tov Shin Mem, my brother's Bar Mitzvah. So the Rebbe made his Bar Mitzvah into Fabrengen, which is a special thing. I think people will say that so for 2 years, the Rebbe Fabrengen Motzei Shabbos. The first Fabrengen Shabbos was Chof Cheshvan Mem, and very shortly after that, the Motzei Shabbos Fabrengen stopped. He went back to Fabrengen Shabbos afternoon. And the Rebbe Fabrengen long, and the Rebbe came back full. His voice was strong, and he would Fabrengen for long periods of time. It was amazing. The recovery of the Rebbe was extraordinary. And I think people will say that the end of the recovery is 3 years after. Tov Shin Mem Aleph was already 3 whole years. The whole Lamed Ches, the whole Lamed Tes, the whole Tov Shin Mem. So Tov Shin Mem Aleph Tishrei was 3 complete years after the heart attack. And the Rebbe was back in full. And there's 2 things that happened that Tishrei that are worth noting. The first is, there became a new meaning in Lubavitch, not to bother the Rebbe, in quotes. And I want you to know, this is the greatest regret of my life. The single greatest regret of my life is this. We didn't go for Kesha Bracha, we didn't go for Lekach, because in quotes, we didn't want to bother the Rebbe. I went for Kesha Bracha once a year. I never went for Lekach, I took somebody else's Lekach. We didn't go for matter. The Rebbe stopped himself. And the most serious thing is we didn't write to the Rebbe. Our teacher said, don't write to the Rebbe personal things because you don't want to burden the Rebbe with work. They were so wrong. They were so wrong. It was such a big mistake. During that Tishrei, at one of the Fabrengenischen, the Rebbe spoke about this. That there's people who are telling other people not to go to Kesha Bracha. And the Rebbe said, how did he express himself? Tipshim shebetipshim, fools of fools. The Rebbe carried on how wrong it was. If he's giving lekach, everybody should go. If he's giving eshbach, don't worry about me, I'm fine. And that anybody who tells anybody else is an idiot, a fool, the tipshim to betipshim. This is one thing that happened that Tishrei Memel. The other thing was, there was a Yid named Zalman Jaffe, Mr. Zalman Jaffe. We should probably call him Rabbi Zalman Jaffe. He was a businessman. He became very close to the Rebbe. He really did. And in Yechidus that year, Mem Aleph, the Rebbe said to him, if Chassidim want me to live, they need to show that they need their Rebbe. The Rebbe said that. If Chassidim want me to live, they need to show they need their Rebbe. They have to write to me. And they have to go to Kesha Baruch. The Rebbe told them straight, my health depends on Chassidim needing me, not leaving me alone. If Chassidim, he used those words, if Chassidim want me to live, the Rebbe said to Mr. Jaffe, they have to show that they need me. They have to come to Kesha Bracha. And they have to come to Lekach. And when I give something, they shouldn't say shy away. In other words, the Rebbe says, my life depends on my ability to be a mashpia. That's what the Rebbe said. What we just had today was a Fabrengen. It's a version. You can sit there, Shchedesh Kislev Fabrengen in 1,000 ways. But this is what I wanted to share. To me, this is fascinating, this idea. That the Rebbe's body is made of different material, Most people have a heart attack like that. It's for life, The Rebbe took 6 weeks, made himself all better. The heart never healed, but the guy Gufon right on going. They're going to go like nothing happened. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, you think during days there was a lack of meeting the Rebbe?
Oh,